They say lightning doesn't strike twice. But storms will find you again and again, especially if you've already learned how to survive them. I moved to Oak Glen Estates 5 years ago because it was supposed to be safe, quiet, predictable. You mow your lawn, wave to the neighbors, pay the HOA dues, and no one bothers you. At least that's what I told myself when I signed the deed. But I didn't come here to make friends. I came here because the last time a tornado ripped through my life, it didn't just take my childhood home. It took my mother with it. I was 14. We'd been in the kitchen when the power died and the walls shook like cardboard. She shoved me into the bathtub, threw a mattress on top of me, and I didn't see her again. They found her a mile away. I learned that day that safe isn't a given. It's something you prepare for. So when I finally bought this house, a modest ranch style on the edge of the cul-de-sac, I already had a plan. Before the furniture was even in, I started digging. Not some makeshift hole, a proper storm shelter, reinforced concrete, air vents, locking steel door, stocked supplies. A survival capsule. I didn't ask permission. I didn't need to. The land was mine, and I'd be damned if I ever let someone I loved go unprotected again. I kept to myself mostly, just me and my dog Jasper. I was the quiet guy on Hemlock Drive, the one with the military haircut and no family photos in the window. I didn't go to HOA meetings. I didn't complain when people parked like idiots or when some kid egged my mailbox. That's life. Let people do their thing. I'll do mine. The trouble started small. A manila envelope taped to my front door one Saturday morning. Notice of violation. It said something about unapproved structures and modifications inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. My shelter was behind the house, barely visible unless you were snooping. I hadn't advertised it. No one had complained, at least not to me. That was the first time I heard her name, Karen Whitmore, head of the compliance committee. She lived 3 houses up with her husband Rick and a terrier named Muffin. She ran the newsletter, chaired the holiday lights contest, and had a face that defaulted to disapproval. She'd apparently walked past my backyard, seen the vent pipe sticking up near the fence, and opened a formal investigation. Her words, not mine. I thought it would blow over. I checked the permits and everything was legal. I mailed copies to the HOA and waited 2 weeks, nothing. Then another letter came. This time certified. Remove the structure within 10 business days or face penalties. That was when I started to feel that old tension again, the one I hadn't felt since Kandahar. The sense that someone else's mistake was about to become your catastrophe. I called, emailed, even went to Karen's door to explain. I told her what the shelter meant, that it was built to protect, not to disturb. She looked at me like I'd told her I was burying landmines. It's not personal, she said. The rules are the rules. That night, thunder rolled far off in the distance. A dry storm, the kind that just teases. Jasper curled up on my boots while I reread every HOA rule and county code. I wasn't dismantling that shelter. Not now, not ever. A storm doesn't care about your regulations. When it comes, you'd better have a place to hide. The ground behind my house was hard clay, the kind that broke shovels and left your palms raw. But I dug anyway. I poured the concrete myself, installed the vents, the rebar, the fan, everything by hand. It wasn't a project. It was a mission. I had permits, inspections, everything approved, legal and safe. But Karen didn't care. She sent compliance agents and private contractors onto my property when I wasn't home. I found boot prints, an unlatched gate, and eventually caught them on camera, walking around, taking photos, trying the shelter door. I sent the footage to the HOA. No response. So I printed stills and dropped them in Karen's mailbox. The next morning, she was waiting on my lawn. We're within our rights to inspect properties in violation, she said coldly. You're not law enforcement, I replied. No, she said, but the board grants temporary easement to ensure compliance. She was lying. There was no such clause. So I started documenting everything, every letter, visit, and rule violation. I even recorded the county clerk confirming my shelter was legal. Then I took it all to the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse was overdecorated, full of bottled water no one drank. Karen sat at the head of the table like a judge. I waited for the open comment period, stood, and calmly laid down my folder. My name is Michael Grant, I said. I live at 212 Hemlock. My storm shelter is legal and permitted. Your contractors trespassed on my property. If it continues, I'll seek a restraining order. Silence. Then murmurs. Karen said, "That may be your opinion." "No," I said. "That's the law." Something shifted in her eyes, not fear but annoyance. She hadn't expected me to show up. 3 days later, I came home to find the shelter's entrance blocked, chained and padlocked with a fake "Do Not Enter" sign. It wasn't from the city. It was from her. They'd made up new rules, HOA Code 431, which didn't even exist. I checked the CCNRs myself. It was a fabrication, bureaucratic bluff, paper threats. I went to City Hall and met with a zoning officer named Carla Suarez. She reviewed my documents and said, "They're overstepping. The shelter meets all municipal standards. You're fully compliant." The city issued a formal warning to the HOA. Carla said, "They're not going to like it, but they're not going to win." 2 days later, I came home to find the back gate open, Jasper barking like mad. The shelter door, gone, torn off completely, hinges twisted, metal scattered like teeth. My heart went cold. I called the police, but they said it was a civil matter. That's when I realized I was on my own. They could destroy my property, and the system wouldn't care because it was HOA business. People still believed HOA meant order and decency. They hadn't watched a storm erase their world. That night, Karen walked by during her evening stroll. She didn't look at me, but I saw it in her eyes. Satisfaction. The belief that no one could touch her. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Karen ran the HOA like a private kingdom. She memorized bylaws and quoted them like scripture. But it was never about community, and it was about power. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, and no one stepping out of line. The morning after my shelter was destroyed, I showed up at her house. Her husband Rick was outside and went pale when he saw me. "She's not home," he said, too fast. "She's watching through the blinds," I replied. Moments later, Karen came out, pink robe, mug in hand that said "Dear Sartans, boss lady." "You shouldn't be here," she said. "And you shouldn't be destroying other people's property," I replied. "You had someone rip my shelter door off." She didn't flinch. "You refused to comply." "It was legal," I said. "You don't have the authority. That's not your call." "The city knows," I told her. "And when this hits court, your name will be on every exhibit." For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt, but calculation. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "This neighborhood has standards. People don't want underground bunkers next door. It makes them uncomfortable." The message being, I asked, that their lives might be worth protecting? "It's nothing personal," she said. "It's everything personal," I replied. "You've violated my rights and endangered people, all in the name of aesthetics." She looked away. "No one asked for it. I didn't build it for them," I said. "I built it because I've watched a tornado take everything I love. And I'll be damned if I let it happen again." She tightened her grip on her mug. "Rules are rules," she said finally. "Then you'd better follow them," I told her. "Because this time you're the one breaking them." I walked away, hands trembling, not from fear but fury. The same feeling I'd had overseas when you knew the enemy wasn't fighting fair, and you had to beat them anyway. My motion cameras caught everything. I sent the footage to Carla. Clear video of a truck with the HOA logo parked near my property the same day the door disappeared. 2 men in reflective vests and unmarked uniforms, one holding bolt cutters, the other a crowbar. Carla called me an hour later. "I've already submitted a formal complaint," she said. And I forwarded the footage to the city attorney's office. "This is destruction of a life-saving structure during declared storm season. That puts it under emergency infrastructure interference. They could be liable for more than property damage, possibly reckless endangerment." That was something. But Karen wasn't done. The next day, a new sign appeared on the community bulletin board near the mailbox cluster. "Community safety reminder. Unauthorized storm shelters pose risks to neighborhood infrastructure integrity." It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who wrote it. I saw neighbors reading it, whispering, frowning. Some looked toward my house like I'd brought danger into their peaceful world. Like I was the problem. Not the one building protection, but not everyone believed her. The Harveys, an older couple from the corner lot, stopped me later that day. "Michael," Mrs. Harvey said softly, "we think what they're doing to you is wrong." "That shelter, it's a good idea." Mr. Harvey nodded. "My brother lost his home in Joplin. He would have given anything for something like that." I thanked them. It meant more than I expected. Because the truth was, Karen could post all the bulletins she wanted, but nature didn't care about compliance codes, and sooner or later the wind was going to blow. It was a Tuesday, hot, windless, the kind of day where the sky looks too still, like it's holding its breath. I remember because I'd left early that morning to help a friend across town move some furniture. Jasper stayed home with the blinds drawn and the ceiling fan on low. Just another normal day until it wasn't. When I came back, the gate was open again, swinging slowly in the breeze. The backyard was dead quiet. Jasper barked once from inside, then went silent. The smell hit me. Dust, metal, and something faintly chemical. Then I saw the truck, parked on the grass behind my house. White, unmarked except for a magnetic decal, Oak Glen Estates HOA Facilities Team. 2 men stood near my storm shelter. One held a crowbar, the other had a bolt cutter in one hand and a large industrial padlock in the other. Reflective vests, baseball caps. They didn't look like professionals, just hired muscle. The steel posts I had pulled out days earlier were back, now set in fresh cement. A thick new chain ran through them, tagged with a red warning label. Restricted HOA property and do not tamper. My stomach dropped. Before I realized it, I was sprinting across the lawn. What the hell do you think you're doing? The man with the bolt cutter jumped. The one with the crowbar stood his ground. We're securing the structure per directive from the compliance committee, he said, like reading from a script. That's my property, I snapped. You're trespassing, interfering with emergency infrastructure. That's criminal, he shrugged. We were told this was HOA jurisdiction. You were told wrong. I pulled out my phone and hit record. His expression changed, not scared, just irritated, like I'd made his easy job difficult. I want your names and now. The second man turned toward the truck. Hey, I barked. Move one more step and I swear. They froze. For a moment the whole world was silent. 3 grown men in a perfectly trimmed backyard, surrounded by bird feeders and lilac bushes. Tension thick enough to break the air. Then came the sound, the click of a gate latch. Karen. She stood beyond the fence, arms crossed, sunglasses on, wearing that same smug half-smile she saved for moments she thought she'd already won. They're just doing their jobs. Michael, she said sweetly, maybe if you'd followed protocol. There's no protocol for breaking into someone's shelter, I cut her off. This isn't a sandbox. This is private property. You've crossed a line. I have board authorization, she said. Board authorization doesn't override state law, I shot back. You're interfering with emergency preparedness infrastructure and during active storm season. She flinched, just slightly. I have the city's letter, the permits, the video evidence. You're done? Her smile didn't fade. Then sue us, she said, turning away. Her heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks. The 2 men followed her. I stood there long after they left, fists clenched, heart pounding. I should have ripped the chain down right then, but I didn't. Something stopped me. Not fear, something colder. The realization that these people didn't just break rules, they rewrote them in real time. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't since the battlefield. Threat without a uniform, not from soldiers or criminals, but from a woman with a clipboard and a grudge. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, fan humming above me, laptop open. I filed a restraining order. I sent every piece of footage to the city. And I called an old contact, a civil rights attorney named Evan Banks, a man who specialized in property rights and municipal abuse. He listened quietly, then said, You're not going to like how deep this might go. Try me, I said. He told me about other cases, small communities turned into fiefdoms, compliance committees morphing into control cults. No legal training, maximum entitlement. They always think no one will fight, he said, until someone does. That night I sat on the floor beside Jasper. He curled up next to me, grounding me. That shelter wasn't just concrete, it was a line in the sand I wasn't going to bend. And I damn sure wasn't going to let anyone chain me out of it again. The restraining order was filed under Section 22 of the Texas Civil Practices and Remedies Code. Interference with life-saving infrastructure. Evan made the language sharp. Deliberate obstruction, unauthorized entry, targeted harassment during emergency weather season. We weren't pulling punches. But the HOA didn't panic. They delayed, deflected, and hid behind bureaucracy. The first letter Evan sent got no response. The second, certified and signed, got a one-line reply from an HOA legal liaison named Brett Simmons. "We are reviewing the matter internally." That was their favorite phrase, internally. Everything was internal. Internal reviews, internal decisions. As if the HOA were a sovereign nation above the law, I kept going. I sent letters to the city council, posted everything on the neighborhood Facebook page, even printed flyers for the post office, evidence of every illegal action they'd taken. People noticed. Some avoided me, others nodded quietly. A few, like the Harveys, left kind notes on my porch. "You're doing the right thing." I kept every one of them, but Karen wasn't done tightening her grip. A week after the restraining order, another bulletin went out. In response to recent misinformation about neighborhood safety, the board reminds residents that unauthorized property modifications are subject to strict review. Violators will be fined accordingly. No names, but everyone knew. Evan filed a cease and desist letter citing municipal overreach, property damage, and harassment. 10 days to respond. They didn't. Instead, they held a secret meeting, 7 a.m. Monday, and passed a new emergency infrastructure amendment. It stated that all storm shelters must be aesthetically compatible with community architecture. Retroactive. Enforcement implied. I laughed when I read it. "Looks like they wrote it on a napkin," I told Evan. He smirked. "It's like they want to get sued." The next day, I got a bill in the mail. Compliance fine. Emergency structure violation. They claimed my shelter created visual disharmony and lowered property values. That was the breaking point. I stormed into the management office, binder in hand. "I need to speak to Brett Simmons." "Mr. Simmons isn't taking walk-ins," the receptionist said. "He'll take this one," I replied, dropping the binder on the counter. 20 minutes later, Brett appeared, thin, nervous, fake calm. "Mr. Grant," he said, "there's been some confusion." "It's not confusion," I said. "It's harassment, and it's going to cost your HOA 6 figures. He held up a hand. "Let's not escalate." It escalated when your people destroyed emergency infrastructure during tornado season. He flipped through the binder. Photos, letters, video stills, eyes widening slightly. "This isn't going away," I said. "Tell your board the next letter they get will come stamped by a judge." Then I left. A week passed, too. No response. The padlock was still there. Then the sky changed. The air turned sharp with ozone. The news warned of instability, atmospheric pressure dropping. I knew that smell. Metallic, heavy, like memory. Neighbors started asking, "Is that shelter still locked?" I didn't answer. I stocked it instead on batteries, food, water. I fixed what I could of the broken door. I wasn't afraid of the storm. I was afraid of what they'd say after it hit, but nature doesn't wait for votes. Wednesday afternoon, the wind shifted, slow, deliberate. The clouds bruised the horizon. The sky went that eerie green that never means anything good. I stood on my porch, coffee cold in my hand, Jasper at my side, both of us staring into the darkening distance. The radar showed a classic supercell, the kind meteorologists warn about for days before it hits. This time, I was ready. Except I wasn't allowed to be. The HOA's padlock still hung there, mocking me. Technically, I could cut it. Legally, I had every right. But I knew Karen. She'd twisted into vandalism of HOA property. So, I didn't. Instead, I filed an emergency notice with the city, attaching a photo of the chain shelter and the incoming storm warning circled in red. I tagged it, "Obstruction of critical emergency shelter during active tornado advisory." I even CC'd the local news station. That evening, a knock came at the door. It was Greg Harvey, flashlight in one hand, blanket in the other. "Is it true?" he asked. "Your shelter's still sealed?" I nodded. "They haven't removed the lock." His jaw tightened. "They've gone mad." Behind him stood his wife, Martha, clutching bottled water. "We'd like to shelter with you," she said softly. "If it comes." "You're welcome anytime," I said. They weren't the only ones. By 9 p.m., 4 more neighbors showed up, some with blankets, one with a cat in a carrier. None of them asked permission. They just stood there, eyes wide, thunder rolling like distant artillery. "I told the HOA we were going to Michael's," one woman said. Karen told me it's not approved. I looked at her. And what did you say? She smiled.
I told her I don't give a damn about her approval. I took a deep breath.
Then stay close, I said. We may need to act quickly. The door's compromised, but it's functional. If the wind hits hard, stay low. Backs to the wall. I've got CS, food, water, emergency lights, radios. You sure? Greg asked. I built it for this, I said, even if they don't want us to have it. Around 11 p.m., the siren started. A long, rising wail fractured by wind echoing off rooftops. Official now. The National Weather Service had declared a tornado warning for our county. I turned on the emergency radio. A calm voice stated coordinates, radar confirmations, words like rotation, shelf cloud, funnel, touchdown. Likely, and then it happened. A sound unlike anything else. Deep, primal, wrong. Not thunder, not wind. A kind of roaring vacuum, like the world itself was being sucked inside out. The house groaned. The lights flickered. Jasper barked once, sharp and loud. Go, I shouted. We moved as a unit through the kitchen, out the back door into the darkened yard. The sky was flashing strobe white and sick green. The fence was bending in the gusts, the trees dancing like drunks in a riot. When we reached the shelter, I yanked off the tarp covering the entrance. The chain was still there. I held up the bolt cutter, looked at Greg. This is trespassing, according to them. He grinned grimly. Then I'll be your accomplice. I cut the chain. The lock clanged to the grass like a guillotine blade falling. We pulled open the door. I ushered everyone inside. 7 neighbors, 2 pets, and 1 elderly man who'd nearly tripped over the threshold in his hurry. Last in was Jasper. I slammed the door shut behind us, sealed it as best I could with the latches, then braced it with a metal rod I'd installed during the build. Inside, the air was still. My emergency lights clicked on, a soft yellow glow casting long shadows against the concrete walls. I moved from face to face, checking for panic, for breath, for clarity. Then the ground shook. The sound outside rose to a hellish pitch, like freight trains, wailing steel and thousands of fists pounding on the roof of the earth all at once. Dust fell from the vents. One woman whimpered. Someone prayed. Jasper pressed tight against my leg. I knelt near the corner, radio in hand, tuning through static until I heard the words. Confirmed touchdown, near Oak Glen Estates. Debris signature detected. Significant structural damage. My heart thudded once, hard. Then again. I knew what that meant. The tornado hadn't just passed nearby. It hit us hard. The rest of the night was a blur of noise and waiting. After the worst passed, I didn't let anyone leave for another 45 minutes, just in case of a second wave. We stayed huddled, wrapped in blankets, breathing heavy, listening to the silence above like it was a trapdoor ready to spring open. When we finally emerged just after dawn, the sun was rising through a haze of dust. And the Oak Glen Clubhouse, the proud centerpiece of Karen's empire, was gone. Leveled. All that remained was a twisted playground of shattered beams, crumbled brick, and a dangling crooked sign that read, "Welcome home." We stood in stunned silence at the edge of the wreckage. The soft crunch of broken shingles beneath our feet was the only sound for miles. The tornado hadn't just brushed the neighborhood. It had cut through it like a blade. The first structure in its path was the Oak Glen Clubhouse, the building that once held HOA meetings, community luncheons, and wine and cheese compliance briefings. Now it looked like a war zone. Its frame was a mangled mess of aluminum and concrete. The roof had been peeled off and thrown across the tennis court like a paper plate. The east wall had collapsed entirely, exposing what remained of a community office desk now buried beneath cinder blocks and rain-soaked file folders. A woman's voice cracked in the morning air. "Oh my God, they were inside." I turned sharply. Across the field of debris, 3 figures stumbled from behind what used to be the parking structure. Karen Whitmore, her husband Rick, and a young man I didn't recognize. Their clothes were torn, caked in mud and plaster dust. Karen's hair clung to her face in wet clumps, her arms wrapped protectively around her chest, like the building had collapsed not just on top of her, but inside her. She wasn't screaming now. She was shaking. When she saw me standing with Greg and the others near the shelter, her eyes widened, not with anger, not with accusation, but recognition, because we were fine. And she knew why. We had been inside the shelter. The same one she had tried to destroy, padlock, and shame me for building. It was Greg who broke the silence. We were safe, he said. We all were, because of Michael. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face flickered between disbelief and disbelief again, like her brain was stuck trying to process a version of events where she wasn't the hero. Paramedics arrived shortly after. The tornado had taken a wide, vicious path, but by sheer luck or cruel irony, the worst of its wrath had focused itself on the HOA Clubhouse and a handful of surrounding properties, while the rest of the neighborhood escaped with broken fences and debris-strewn lawns. City officials showed up by noon. So did the press. I stood behind the yellow caution tape as a local news crew interviewed a teary Martha Harvey on live TV. He saved us, she said, voice trembling but clear. That shelter. He built it himself years ago. The HOA tried to lock it, tried to shut it down, but he kept it, and thank God he did. A younger woman chimed in, Sasha, from the cul-de-sac, holding her toddler tight. If it weren't for Michael, we wouldn't be here. They locked our only safe place and told us to wait it out. The reporter looked directly into the camera. This raises serious questions about HOA authority and responsibility during natural disasters. We've reached out to Oak Glen Estates Board for comment, but so far no response. No response, because the board had no comment to give. They were too busy digging themselves out of rubble, both physical and reputational. By the next morning, the story had hit regional news. The headline read, Neighborhood Storm Shelter Locked by HOA. Residents survive tornado after breaking in. My name was mentioned. So was Karen's. I didn't speak to her that day or the next. I watched from my porch as the HOA clubhouse was cordoned off with city-issued tape. Engineers assessed the damage. Code enforcement combed the scene. Drones buzzed overhead, filming what had once been Karen's kingdom. 3 days after the tornado, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't a neighbor this time. It was Carla Suarez from the city zoning office, flanked by 2 municipal officers and a woman with a clipboard from emergency management. They came inside, reviewed my shelter plans again, inspected the frame, asked thoughtful, serious questions. Then Carla said something I'll never forget. You did more for this neighborhood's safety than the HOA ever did. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a certificate of municipal exemption and emergency use designation. In plain terms, she said, this shelter is now officially city-acknowledged emergency infrastructure. No private organization, including any HOA, has authority to alter, block, or regulate it in any way. I stared at the document, speechless. Carla smiled. We're also opening a formal investigation into HOA practices here. The city council's already been briefed. Later that afternoon, I saw Karen in her yard. She was sweeping broken glass from her porch, moving slowly, methodically, like she didn't want to be seen but couldn't bear to stay hidden. Her face was pale. Her hands shook. We made eye contact. She opened her mouth, maybe to say something, maybe even to apologize, but she didn't. She just stood there. And I didn't move, because sometimes silence is the most powerful statement of all. It didn't take long for the lawsuits to start piling up. Within 2 weeks, Oak Glen Estates found itself buried beneath a different kind of storm, one made of subpoenas, deposition requests, and formal letters from every office with a seal and a fax machine. I didn't have to lift a finger. The people did it for me. Martha and Greg Harvey filed first. Emotional distress, reckless endangerment, obstruction of emergency shelter. Then came Sasha, the old man with the cat, and the family from Cypress Street, the ones who hadn't made it into my shelter in time and had spent the tornado cowering in their crawl space. Even some who didn't take shelter with me joined in, demanding an overhaul of HOA leadership, calling for transparency, for resignations. The local paper ran a front-page headline, Community Left Vulnerable by HOA, Shelter Saved 7. But it wasn't just the lawsuits that broke them. It was the publicity. News stations showed aerial shots of the flattened clubhouse, interviews with seniors who'd begged for better emergency protocols, the freeze frame of Karen saying, rules are rules in a pre-storm meeting, replayed so many times it became a meme. Tonight at 6, one anchor teased, when HOA power goes too far and nature strikes back. I couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone stopping me. You're the guy with the shelter, right? God bless you, man. You saved lives. It was surreal. I didn't ask for attention. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just didn't want people to die for the sake of a regulation. But there it was. My storm shelter, now repainted, resecured, recertified, plastered across every HOA reform article in the state. City Hall called next. The mayor's assistant invited me to speak at a council meeting. For the first time in my life, I stood at a podium, not in uniform, not in court, not testifying to trauma, but testifying to change. I told them about my mother, about the bathtub, about the mattress she threw over me before the tornado took her. I told them about the shelter I built with my own hands, the first notice, the chain, the padlock, about Karen's smug smile and the words, "No one asked for it." And I told them what happened when the wind came anyway. They listened. Then they voted unanimously to adopt a new ordinance. No HOA in the city could regulate, prohibit, obstruct, or tamper with any structure deemed necessary for life safety by the homeowner and permitted by city code. The crowd clapped. But I didn't smile, because outside that chamber in the real world, Karen was still fighting. She'd hired a lawyer, a sharp-tongued man from Dallas. Claimed the HOA had only acted in aesthetic preservation, but no amount of spin could change the truth. They'd locked people out of safety, and I had let them in. City investigators showed up at HOA headquarters next. They confiscated files, emails, logs. Rumors spread that Karen had falsified violation notices, even backdated certain board votes that never happened. If true, it meant she hadn't just abused her power, she'd fabricated it. By the end of the month, she was removed. Not resigned, removed. We needed 53 signatures. We got 89. They posted the results on the same bulletin board where she once pinned that community safety reminder about my shelter. Someone had scribbled underneath in red Sharpie. Safety, 1. I never saw Karen again after that day. Rick sold their house quietly 2 weeks later. No one waved goodbye. They vanished like smoke from a burned-out fire. But the damage they left behind, that stayed. Even after the city leveled the remains of the clubhouse, the neighborhood had a scar, made of silent suspicion and the uncomfortable knowledge that for too long, we all let them get away with it. That's what power does when no one checks it. It rots, but that sheltering, it stood. I repainted it navy blue, replaced the steel door with a heavier one, installed a biometric lock, a generator, ventilation redundancy, even a backup radio tower. The city offered to pay. I said no, this wasn't theirs. This was mine, and next time, because there's always a next time, no one would have to ask permission to survive. The new key was different. Digital, fingerprint locked, heavy. But what made it matter wasn't the tech. It was the principle. That key, tucked against my chest, represented something no one could regulate, fine, or chain up again. Autonomy, preparedness, dignity. A few months passed. Oak Glen Estates looked cleaner, new paint, trimmed hedges, fresh flowers. But beneath it all was a stillness. A tension that hadn't lifted. No more fines for mailbox colors. No more Karen-style crusades. Just basics. Sometimes that's all people want. To be left in peace. No one talks about the clubhouse anymore. The lot is empty now and flat, quiet, covered in grass. A reminder of what happens when control outweighs care. As for Karen, last I heard she'd moved to a gated community upstate. No HOA leadership this time, just a regular homeowner. I don't know if she ever told her new neighbors what happened here. I doubt it, but I still see her sometimes. Not her exactly, but her type. The kind who scoffs at warnings, who rolls their eyes at the word shelter. It doesn't scare me anymore because I'm not the same man I was when this started. Back then, I just wanted to be left alone, to protect myself quietly. I thought if I did it right, if I followed the rules, they'd let me be. They didn't. So I learned to speak up, to stand my ground, to cut the chain before the storm hits. A few weeks ago, Greg and Martha came by with banana bread. We sat on the porch drinking coffee as Jasper snoozed in the sunlight. Greg asked if I ever thought about leaving. Leaving Oak Glen? I said. He nodded. After everything, I wouldn't blame you. I looked at the neighborhood, the fences, the sidewalks, the kids riding bikes again. No, I said. This is still my home. They smiled and left. I turned back toward the yard, toward the shelter. Low, quiet, unobtrusive, but there. Ready. I descended the steps and opened the door. Cool air met my face. The light flicked on. Everything was in place, and food, water, supplies. I ran my fingers across the smooth steel that used to be dented and bent by crowbars. For a while I just stood there. Not because I was afraid, but because I was proud. I'd kept the key. I'd kept my voice, and in a world where storms, of wind, of power, of people, can take everything in seconds. Holding on to even one small piece of dignity, that's survival, that's victory, that's home.